A television screen hisses with dead static, casting a sickly blue glow on a room that doesn't officially exist. The audio track is just a rhythmic, mechanical hum over the sound of a patient begging to remember their own name. The observer in the sterile coat doesn't hear a human being pleading for mercy, he only sees raw, biological hardware waiting to be wiped clean. There is a frequency playing just beneath the threshold of human hearing, a broadcast designed to unspool your sanity. The true front lines of global conflict are no longer mapped on terrain, but carved into the fragile architecture of the human cortex. A paranoid intelligence apparatus is consumed by a terrifying obsession, the absolute certainty that the soul can be hacked and reformatted like a machine. Panic sets in, a cold sweat creeping down the necks of men in tailored suits. In response, Project MKUltra is born in the dark. Enter Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist with a club foot and a stutter, who finds solace in folk dancing and raising goats. But beneath this quirky exterior lies a chilling, absolute detachment. Gottlieb is given a blank check and a terrifying mandate: find a way to control the human mind, to shatter the ego and rebuild it from the ground up. He begins by procuring the entire global supply of a new Swiss hallucinogen called LSD. The early experiments are haphazard, chaotic, and utterly ruthless. Unwitting subjects are dosed in brothels, bars, and safe houses reeking of stale cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. The goal is clear, yet horrific: to break the mind into jagged shards and reassemble it under state control. This isn't just about espionage, it's about playing God in a sterile room. The humming lights buzz overhead like a swarm of angry wasps, drowning out the pleas of the confused. The narcissistic belief that the ends justify the means becomes the bedrock of MKUltra. But what happens when the architect of the mind's destruction feels no remorse, only a clinical curiosity? Gottlieb watches the panic unfold, taking precise notes on the geometry of fear. He views his subjects not as human beings, but as raw data, biological hardware waiting to be reprogrammed. The sterile smell of ozone and antiseptic cleaner lingers in the air, a physical reminder of the clinical detachment at play. The subjects sweat, they scream, they claw at their own faces, while the scientists simply observe. Who is watching the watchers when the moral compass is completely shattered? The Machiavellian core of MKUltra reveals itself in Operation Midnight Climax. The CIA sets up covert safe houses in San Francisco and New York, outfitting them with two-way mirrors, hidden microphones, and reel-to-reel tape recorders that spin with a continuous, hypnotic hiss. Prostitutes are placed on the agency payroll, instructed to lure unsuspecting men back to these compromised rooms. Their drinks are quietly spiked with heavy doses of LSD. George Hunter White, a federal narcotics agent acting directly on Gottlieb's orders, sits behind the silvered glass of the two-way mirror, sipping dry martinis and observing the induced chaos. It is a calculated, deeply cynical manipulation of human vulnerability. The subjects are chosen specifically because they are deemed expendable, marginalized men who wouldn't dare report the bizarre incidents to the police for fear of criminal charges or public humiliation. This is textbook Machiavellianism, a strategic, emotionally detached exploitation of others for institutional gain. The planners view these human lives as mere biological mechanisms to be triggered and studied. As the powerful hallucinogen takes hold, the men panic. They sweat profusely, their eyes darting around the room, perceiving threats in the heavy, floral-patterned wallpaper. They lose their grip on reality, trapped in a chemically induced nightmare. Behind the glass, the observers take meticulous notes, their faces illuminated only by the harsh, flickering glow of a single desk lamp. The room smells of stale alcohol, cheap cologne, and the distinct, coppery tang of raw fear. The scientists are completely devoid of empathy, treating the suffering as a necessary variable in their grand equation. The rhythmic clacking of typewriter keys records the unraveling of human sanity. If human dignity is the currency required to purchase national security, the CIA is writing blank checks with the lives of the unwitting. We move deeper into the frozen heart of the operation. The psychopathy of the project becomes glaringly, horrifyingly apparent in the sub-project involving Dr. Ewan Cameron in Montreal. Funded by a CIA front organization, Cameron conducts what he calls psychic driving experiments at the Allen Memorial Institute. His patients are not enemy spies or hardened defectors, they are ordinary, trusting people seeking help for postpartum depression, anxiety, or mild neurotic disorders. Cameron subjects them to massive, debilitating doses of electroshock therapy, chemically inducing sleep for months at a time in rooms where the fluorescent lights hum with a sickening, relentless vibration. The air is thick with the smell of clinical iodine and the unwashed sweat of the sedated. He forces them to listen to endless reel-to-reel tape loops of negative messages, playing under their pillows for hours on end. The static of the recording scratches against their vulnerable eardrums. He actively works to destroy their memories, their personalities, erasing the very core of who they are. He leaves them incontinent, amnesic, mere empty shells of their former selves, unable to recognize their own children. The utter lack of empathy, the callous, calculated disregard for extreme human suffering, this is the clinical, textbook definition of psychopathy. Sidney Gottlieb funds this research directly, fully aware of the permanent devastation it causes. The victims are considered acceptable collateral damage in a twisted, relentless quest for total behavioral control. They went to a hospital seeking healing, and instead, they found a monster operating under the guise of medical authority. The sterile white coats hide a darkness that defies comprehension. The patients lie in their beds, staring blankly at the acoustic ceiling tiles, their minds fractured beyond repair. If the doctors themselves are the monsters, who can you possibly trust when the lights finally go out in the ward? The clinical detachment of the MKUltra scientists is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of the entire Black program. They document the screaming, the profound terror, the chemically shattered minds with a sickening, bureaucratic precision. Internal memos discuss terminal experiments, a sterile, sanitized euphemism for state-sponsored murder. In the chill of November 1953, Frank Olson, a biological warfare scientist working closely with Gottlieb, is unwittingly dosed with LSD during a rural retreat at Deep Creek Lake. The men sit in a wooden cabin, the smell of pine and burning logs masking the betrayal in the glass. Days later, Olson's paranoia reaches a fever pitch. He plunges through the closed glass window of a 13th floor room at the Hotel Statler in New York City, plummeting to the cold concrete below. The official story peddled to the press is a tragic, unforeseen suicide. But the CIA's internal, highly classified documents reveal a frantic, panicked scramble to cover up their direct involvement. The Machiavellian instinct for self-preservation entirely overrides any lingering moral obligation. They look Olson's grieving family in the eye and lie without a flinch. They lie to the American public. The institution protects itself at all costs, acting as a monolithic, sociopathic entity. The truth is hastily buried beneath locked filing cabinets and thick lines of black redaction ink. The humming of the office air conditioner covers the sound of shredding paper. But ghosts have a peculiar way of lingering in the margins of history. The scent of ozone from the photocopiers mixes with the cold sweat of guilty men trying to sanitize their legacies. What exactly did Frank Olson know about the biological atrocities at Camp Dietrich that made him an unacceptable liability to the architects of mind control? The dark triad traits are not merely isolated anomalies within the agency, they are deeply institutionalized, woven into the very fabric of the operation. Sidney Gottlieb operates with absolute, unquestioned autonomy, a phantom moving through the corridors of power. The chain of command willfully turns a blind eye, seduced by the narcissistic, intoxicating illusion of ultimate omnipotence. The CIA genuinely believes it operates above the law, above morality, above the basic constraints of human decency. This unchecked institutional narcissism breeds an isolated, toxic environment where any atrocity can be casually rationalized as a vital necessity for national survival. The horrific experiments inevitably expand from civilian hospitals to federal prisons. At the grim federal penitentiary in Atlanta, and the Addiction Research Center in Lexington, Kentucky, captive inmates are offered heroin or the vague promise of early release in exchange for their participation in severe LSD trials. The sterile smell of the prison infirmary, a nauseating mix of bleach and rust, forms the backdrop for these violations. One inmate, Whitey Bulger, who would later become a notorious, ruthless mob boss, vividly describes the agonizing, deeply nightmarish trips that felt like his brain was being slowly peeled apart. Like and subscribe to keep your mind safe, because the vulnerable, the incarcerated, the marginalized, they are viewed as the perfect, disposable lab rats for men who view human empathy as a fatal weakness. The muffled screams echo off the cold, damp concrete walls of sterile cells, entirely unheard by the oblivious outside world. The flickering fluorescent tubes cast long, distorted shadows, mirroring the twisted ethics of the researchers observing the torment. If the protective state becomes the ultimate abuser, wielding chemical weapons against its own, where is the sanctuary for the broken? The relentless search for a foolproof truth serum leads the agency into the darkest, most lawless corners of the globe. MKUltra establishes a network of clandestine, black sites across Europe and Asia, secret, off-the-books facilities where expendables, captured foreign spies, suspected defectors, or simply unlucky locals swept up in the dragnet, are subjected to the most extreme, unimaginable interrogation techniques. These are not mere experiments, these are real-life horror stories hidden behind classified walls. Subjects endure days of complete sensory deprivation, floating in pitch-black tanks until their minds cannibalize themselves. They suffer induced hypothermia in freezing, damp basements that reek of mold and human waste, their teeth chattering as the cold sweat freezes on their skin. Forced, rapid addiction and sudden withdrawal are used as blunt instruments of compliance. The goal is singular, to induce a state of absolute, infantile dependency and total psychological collapse. The scientists in these bunkers are no longer just chemists or psychologists, they are state-sanctioned torturers. The pure, psychopathic willingness to inflict agonizing physical and mental pain without a single shred of remorse is terrifyingly clear. They use experimental hallucinogens, forced hypnosis, and systematic psychological abuse in tandem, creating a symphony of suffering. The surviving documentation is intentionally sparse, highly redacted, but the fragmented memos that do exist speak of unimaginable torment. The low, electrical hum of the generator is the only sound accompanying the interrogations. People simply vanish into the black holes of the intelligence apparatus, their existence wiped from the ledger, never to be seen or heard from again. It is the ultimate power trip, to completely erase a human being from reality. But can the human mind ever truly be broken, or does it just violently fracture into sharper, more dangerous pieces? The towering hubris of the MKUltra architects eventually begins to crack under the weight of their own monumental failures. Decades of cruel experiments, costing millions of dollars, yield mountains of erratic data but absolutely no reliable, deployable mind control weapon. The human brain proves too deeply complex, too stubbornly resilient to be cleanly reprogrammed like a piece of mechanical hardware. But the irreversible damage is already done. Thousands of lives are completely ruined, left with permanent psychological scars. In the early 1970s, as the sprawling Watergate scandal spectacularly unravels the political establishment and the Church Committee begins its aggressive, probing investigations, the walls rapidly close in on the CIA. Panic, sharp and metallic, floods the executive suites. The deep-seated Machiavellian instinct kicks in one last, desperate time. In 1973, facing imminent exposure, CIA Director Richard Helms issues a frantic, sweeping order for the total destruction of all MKUltra files. It's a calculated, desperate attempt to erase a quarter-century of history, to hide the gruesome atrocities from the glaring light of day. The incinerators roar to life, the smell of burning paper and melting binders filling the air, a thick smoke obscuring the truth. However, 7 mislabeled boxes of financial records miraculously survive by a sheer clerical error, dumped in a forgotten storage facility. These dry accounting ledgers provide the only narrow, horrifying window into the scale of the nightmare. The architects of destruction scramble to vanish into the protective shadows of retirement. But fire doesn't cleanly destroy everything, it leaves choking ashes and blackened remnants. What unimaginable, terrifying secrets were successfully burned in those furnaces that we will never, ever know? Sidney Gottlieb quietly retires from the agency in 1972, taking his darkest secrets with him to a sprawling, idyllic farm in rural Virginia. He peacefully tends to his flock of goats, eagerly practices traditional folk dancing, and lives a life of quiet, unassuming obscurity. The stark juxtaposition is profoundly jarring and deeply unsettling. The very man who personally orchestrated the systematic psychological torture of countless unwitting individuals now lives out his golden years in absolute peace. This is the ultimate, horrifying triumph of the dark Triad personality, the profound ability to perfectly compartmentalize unspeakable horror, to permanently switch off the empathy switch without a single twinge of guilt. The farm smells of fresh hay and damp earth, a sickening contrast to the sterile, ozone-filled rooms where his victims suffered in agony. When finally subpoenaed by the investigative Church Committee, Gottlieb sits comfortably in the witness chair, adjusting his glasses, and repeatedly claims a failing memory. He is legally shielded, granted full immunity from criminal prosecution, effectively untouchable by the very justice system he subverted. The victims, meanwhile, are left destitute, forced to pick up the jagged, broken pieces of their shattered lives, fighting exhausting, decades-long battles for basic acknowledgement and meager financial compensation. The massive bureaucratic system inherently protects the perpetrators of state violence while completely abandoning the most vulnerable citizens to their trauma. It's a chilling, undeniable realization about the true nature of power, secrecy, and the total absence of meaningful accountability. If the chief orchestrator of endless, chemically induced nightmares can sleep soundly to the gentle sounds of crickets, completely untroubled by the ghosts of his past, what does that truly say about the existence of justice in the modern world? The sprawling, toxic legacy of MKUltra remains a permanent, festering scar on the collective American psyche. The shocking revelation that the government secretly experimented on its own unsuspecting citizens completely shatters the foundational illusion of public trust. The paranoid, analog horror that once felt like a late-night science fiction movie is no longer fiction, it is heavily documented, terrifying history. The brutal techniques pioneered by Gottlieb and his associates, prolonged sensory deprivation, extreme psychological manipulation, the weaponization of forced isolation, do not disappear when the program officially closes. They find their way directly into modern, highly classified interrogation manuals, evolving into sanitized, enhanced techniques. The dark triad traits that fueled the horrors of MKUltra are not magically eradicated from the halls of power, they are simply refined, legally justified, and carefully rebranded for a new era of conflict. The problem goes much deeper than the scandalous exposes of the 1970s. The psychological warfare tactics meticulously developed in those humming, sterile rooms continue to heavily influence how modern states exert invisible control over populations. We live entirely within the claustrophobic echo chamber of those early, brutal experiments in human subjugation. The sudden, jarring burst of static on the television screen, the cold sweat that forms when you feel the unmistakable sensation of being watched by an unseen eye, it is the residual, inherited trauma of a society that has realized the monster is incredibly real. And it doesn't hide under the bed in the dark, it wears a perfectly tailored suit and holds a top-tier security clearance. The low hum of the massive server farm replaces the spinning reel-to-reel tape, but the core intent remains exactly the same. Who is holding the invisible strings of control today? We finally end exactly where we began. A sterile, windowless room, illuminated by harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. A heavy, ringing silence that physically presses against the eardrums, smelling faintly of bleach and old copper. The blurred faces of the countless victims, Frank Olson falling endlessly through the shattered glass, the terrified, amnesic patients of Dr. Cameron in Montreal, the unsuspecting men sweating in San Francisco safe houses, slowly fade into the visual snow of a dead television channel. The dark triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, is not just an abstract psychological concept confined to dense medical textbooks, it is a highly effective, operational blueprint for state-sponsored atrocity. Sidney Gottlieb died comfortably in his own bed in 1999, taking the full, unredacted truth down to his grave, evading any earthly consequence. But the lingering, deeply unsettling question remains, was Project MKUltra merely an isolated anomaly, a bizarre and regrettable product of extreme Cold War paranoia, or is it the inevitable, purely logical result of completely unchecked institutional power? When the sprawling state infrastructure views its citizens not as individual human beings with inherent rights, but merely as raw, biological material for the vast machinery of control, the waking nightmare is never truly over. The physical paper files may have been burned to ash in the Langley incinerators, but the psychological fallout lingers heavily in the air like invisible, toxic radiation. Look very closely at the opaque, monolithic systems of power operating silently around you every single day. In their grand actions and policies, do you see genuine human empathy, or do you recognize the calculated, completely cold stare of the unblinking watchers? The recording tape is finally running out, the plastic reel clicking rhythmically, relentlessly against the machine. But the grand experiment on the human mind, is it really over, or has it just evolved into something we can no longer see?